All right, good evening, everybody. It is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, I have the pleasure and honor to bring on one of our own. Andrés Bernal is a new Real Progressive. He is someone that I have followed and in turn followed me, and our paths seem to line up during the Burner meet and greet a few weeks back in New York City. It was very, very exciting because I approached Andres and I said, look, we need a guy like you at Real Progressives. We need someone like you to really help us pro up our game, to level up. And he was very, very excited, very, very into it. And so I went ahead and I introduced Andres to the team, and now he is a member. Without further ado, let me bring on my friend and compadre, Andrés Bernal. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Steve. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. So, let me just tell you, the pleasure is all mine. I am so glad to have you on our team. It's been one of those things where we have worked hard for years trying to get this information into the hands of burners, into the hands of Greens, independents, regular Democrats, even Republicans and libertarians, anyone that'll listen to us. And it's been a tough slog. We have to crack some eggs to make this omelet. And unfortunately, it's left us at times feeling a little bit wounded because, it's tough being a trailblazer. It's tough being the ones that are taking away the myths and legends that we've held onto for dear life. So adding you to this team just really, really made me feel good about the direction we're going and everything that we think we can be in the future. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to come to Real Progressives.
Sure. Yeah. I think it was like a great aligning of paths the way it happened, very synchronicitous. But a little bit about my background. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and I immigrated to this country when I was around 3-4 years old. And there my journey started as an American, as a Colombian American, as a Latino. And around junior year of high school, I was when I was young, I wanted to be a professional soccer player, most of my youth. But I had the great privilege to have parents who were very involved in intellectual development, in politics, in wanting to create a better world, and in working very hard to do those things. So I had the privilege of being raised with those values from a very young age. And then when I was about a junior in high school, I participated with an organization called the National Hispanic Institute. And that was a very formative experience for me, and got me really involved in the importance of community involvement, in the importance of leaving a legacy as you're moving along in life, and the importance of having an impact on your community and on your society and so forth. And so what ended up happening is eventually in college, I decided to study philosophy. And that was kind of my first step into exploring some of these ideas. So as a student of philosophy, I ended up studying, people like Marx, like Keynes, like Rousseau, the existentialists, and then later people that are often referred to as the New Left, who were very critical of what had happened with some of the early revolutions of the 20th century. So people like Marcuse, later like Foucault, and those kinds of thinkers who were really trying to have a more robust understanding of what is power, right? And how does power affect society? How does power shape who we are, shape our consciousness, and those kinds of things? So after that, I ended up doing a master's degree at the University of San Diego in leadership. I took a totally different trajectory from where I was. My foundations were in philosophy, and to me that was really important because that kind of grounded me in how do you think about these things? How do you make sure you have some rigor to your thought processes, to the way that you organize your ideas, to the way that you argue, to the way that you think about things? How do you develop your critical thinking? So that was foundational to me. So then later I took a path in the world of organizations and leadership and people and groups. And that's kind of really looking at how do we shape our identities? How do we shape the way that we experience ourselves in the context of groups, in the context of organizations, in the context of institutions, in the context of our society, and things like that. And so it was very experientially based over there at University of San Diego. Fantastic experience. And I did a small thesis on a cooperative in Northern California. So I got very interested in democratic ownership of organizations and firms, essentially, as a pathway to a more equitable and just society, as a pathway to democratizing wealth in general. And so after that, I was kind of like, all right, so where do I go from here? And there was one university that always caught my attention, and that's the New School here in New York City. So I kind of took a gamble. I only applied there. I managed to get in, and here I am. And ever since I've been here, my world has kind of opened up. It's been crazy, and I guess I'd say, especially in this last year, where we started off the year kind of like in a what is going on with the world type of situation. What's happening? Are we in a post-truth society, right? All these kinds of questions. What's even real anymore? Our president is a reality TV show star. Are we in a peak dystopia, basically? So with all that anxiety and all that stress that came from that experience, at the same time, people really started to mobilize, and people really started to realize that we better get on with this thing. We better start becoming political. We better start caring about what's happening to our community and our society. We better start thinking beyond just like in our own individualism and how only we're going to benefit in our lives and things like that, and realize like, no, there's some serious consequences when you don't pay attention. And in my circles and in my life, I started to encounter through Facebook a lot of fellow intellectuals, academics, activists, and whatnot. And I ended up coming across a group called the Modern Money Network, who I had heard of before, but never really spoken to. And we eventually, I reached out, or they reached out, something like that. I met some of their members through Facebook, and we started messaging. We hung out, and I realized like they were onto this thing called MMT, Modern Monetary Theory. And I was in right there and then, very, very curious. I thought they were onto something, and I spent a good while trying to figure out, okay, what is this thing? What are they talking about? And what is the potential of this idea? So people that I really trusted and respected in those circles of academia were really vouching for this thing. And what I really liked about it is that it was interdisciplinary. It was looking at the economy and macroeconomics and monetary systems from an interdisciplinary perspective. Of course, one of the things that hooked me was chartalism, or the idea that where does money come from? And so rejecting the notion, and of course, as a student of philosophy, I was already skeptical of neoclassical or orthodox mainstream economics from the get-go. I knew that this thing kind of served as a rationalization for elites, an intellectual rationalization for elites. That's kind of been its social function, if you ask me. And so the idea that the history of money is not something that just kind of magically emerged out of barter, but that instead it came from states, it came from authorities that wanted to govern and direct money systems and resources, and make sure that you enforce debt obligations and that sort of thing. That's where money comes from. And so that really hooked me. And sooner or later, I started seeing these videos on Facebook from real progressives. And I was like, who is this Steve guy? Like, he's just, all over the place, really intense, loved your energy. And you were really mobilizing a ton of people to get on real progressives, to check out your videos and your live streams. And I thought that was really amazing, because these are some ideas that need to not stay in just academic circles. We're in a time in history where a lot of academia is isolated. A lot of people in universities, especially in elite universities, have conversations amongst themselves. And, you know, in general, the producers of research and knowledge have been so professionalized that we're kept apart from the rest of society in a lot of ways, and that's not okay. And so part of my activism also is to think about, what does it mean to be a public intellectual today? What does it mean to have rigor, build knowledge, think about things very deeply, think about things in ways that that are debated, that are peer reviewed, but also do it not just for yourself, but do it so that you can then share it and enter into dialogue and debate with the rest of the society, right? That's the whole point of it. Because for me, the whole point of it is that so we can change things and reimagine what our society can look like, to move things in a progressive, in a forward kind of way, based on ethical foundations, based on political foundations of freedom, of participation, of dignity, of respect, and that sort of thing. So that's how I think that's how we came across each other's paths, pretty much.
Well, first things first, I just want to say that was incredible. I'm more in awe that you're on our team now than I was even after all the other conversations we had. That was excellent. So I guess let's just dive right in, because, you know, why not, right? So when you think about what we've been doing, and you think about the fact that, you know, we've been doing this for almost 3 years, okay? Our trajectory started with Stephanie Kelton joining Bernie Sanders' staff. I mean, I wasn't in it for Bernie. I was in it for Kelton, okay?
Right.
And then Kelton brought me to Bernie. I know most people didn't even know who the hell Kelton was, but they were there because Bernie was saying all the right things to them. I had been doing this MMT thing for years prior and slugging it out in these debate groups. And I broke free of the debate groups. I couldn't stand to debate anymore. Not the kind of debate that we do on Facebook. I don't mind the kind of debate where you're sitting there at a table with good people and they're really thinking through issues and they're talking at a deeper level. But for me, it was very, very hard to restrain the urge to say, guys, stop being thimble deep. Stop being just a patina. Start being thinking, because our lives are dependent on you taking more than a glance at this. You've got to we all have to at least scratch beneath the surface and really understand what the implications of this are. And so that's what led us to start Real Progressives. And obviously we have 7 knowledge areas that we base our life on, not just MMT. MMT informs the economics behind everything we do, but MMT is not the only thing we do. And so you look at it, the 7 knowledge areas, and I know that you are aware of this before our audience. You know, we have economic justice, environmental and ecological justice, equality with justice, peace with justice, democracy, health and nutrition, and technology and innovation. All of those put together, you've got every aspect of the progressive movement wrapped in these 7 knowledge areas when you boil them down. It's an opportunity to not just be single-threaded, but to be fully multidisciplined, you know, intersectional in every aspect of this, be able to really create a new norm through mass mobilization. And that's one of the other things that attracted to you, and I want to bring this up publicly. So Real Progressives also has 4 pillars. And of those 4 pillars, we have policy, we have education, we have activism, and we have media. To make all of this work, we've got to have the most robust outreach program ever known to mankind. I mean, seriously, the problem is we're all little islands living unto ourselves. There's all these islands, and they think that they are representing the progressive movement, and they're about, I don't know, a couple thousand people deep, and a couple thousand people, when you have a nation of 350 million, doesn't equate to a movement. And it equates to a different version of that academic sequestration you pointed out to earlier, the balkanization of class, which is baked into this academic, I'm going to say it, a little bit of snobbery at the top that keeps us from being able to be relationally tied as human beings. to make these bold changes that it sounds like we're both on the same page and wanting to make.
Yeah, I think, sure, I think you're absolutely right. There's no other way to do it apart from an interdisciplinary, intersectional, and holistic approach. There's really no other way to do it. I mean, the mere fact that today you have these different disciplines or fields and subfields that don't talk to one another is a consequence of how atomized our society has become. And everybody has their different language, everybody has a different way they speak about things, and it's all very professionalized. And if you look at the consequences of that culturally on our politics, you really see the difference between what some of the establishment Democrats, supporting the Hillary Clinton campaign in the last election, they had a view of policy that was very much, okay, these are the policy points that we're gonna support, and we're just gonna implement this and try to fix things here and there, and that's it. That's how you do it. And that's very different from what Bernie Sanders represented and what this progressive movement represents, what real progressives represent, and what kind of the emerging political consciousness in this country and in the world represents, which doesn't see policy that way, which sees policy as part of politics. And politics is not just elections. Elections is a component of it, but politics is really people and the kind of lives they're living and the conditions that affect their lives on a daily basis, and the extent to which they can participate in their society in a meaningful way, the extent to which our culture and our society allows us to live to our fullest potential. Today everybody wants to talk about reaching your fullest potential, and in a lot of that industry, it's very narrow to how much money can you make and kind of how much of that cultural social power can you attain. But that's very limiting. If we really want to reach our full potential, it's a much more robust conversation about what are the social, environmental, technological, and material conditions, economic conditions that are necessary for us to do that. If you have millions of people in poverty or homeless or losing their jobs or their houses are being foreclosed on, it doesn't matter if there's a tiny group of people who are like filthy rich and whatnot. This affects all of us collectively.
So you know what? I'm gonna hit you up here real quick.
Yeah.
We all have connections to various upward and downward and sideward groups and people and so forth. One of the most difficult groups that I've found to reach, which is incredibly ironic, is our own Bernie-crats and the individuals that are particularly millennials, and many of them female. We have had a difficult time making the connection. There seems to be, and this is where intersectionality kicks in. This is where the ability to speak at varying levels, understanding where everybody's coming from, and so forth, it's quite a challenge for us. And so when I spoke to you, I immediately knew that you're a gentleman that understood the language of these individuals as well. And as we try to present the need for doing more than what the powers that be are telling you is okay. Hey, Bernie didn't go far enough. We love Bernie. Bernie's a great guy, whatever. He did not go far enough. Absolutely. There are things out there that can be done now that if we understood the way the economics worked, you would be asking for far more. If you've ever tried to live on $15 an hour, you know that $15 an hour is still a subsistence wage. There is nobody living high on the hog. There's nobody even barely making it. You can barely live on your own. I don't know that you could live on your own at $15 an hour. Maybe in some rural community in the Midwest where the cost of living is so low that whatever, but not anywhere else. Not anywhere else. Definitely not anywhere on the coasts, and definitely not anywhere along the southern perimeter. It is so expensive to live now. $15 an hour is still like, okay, we fought for 15 and now we lowered the water so you can see over the water line, but your nose and your mouth are still under there. You're still going to die, but damn it, we fought for 15. We feel really good about it. Yay, team, we're fighting for 15. That's what I see a lot of Bernie-crats doing now. They're not really thinking about the policy implications. They're just thinking about, that's what they set up there. So, okay, guys, let's go. Let's charge. And that right there is, it may win votes, but it doesn't save lives. Talk to me a little bit about how we might be able to crack the code to get them to wake up and snap away possibly from waiting for the powers that be to give them the okay to fight for 20 or fight for 30 or fight for a job guarantee.
Sure. I mean, I think that the first thing is that we're all waking up. We're all in this process together where we're all waking up, right? You know, you've mentioned yourself that at one point you're a very libertarian, conservative person, had a lot of views that are different from what they are now. We've all evolved, right? Part of what's happening culturally, for example, with the Me Too movement, is that a lot of men are waking up to a reality in the experiences of women that we were short-sighted on, that we didn't know about, that we ignored in a lot of ways. And so we're all waking up together, right? And part of the work to do that is learning how to speak to one another and unite on these kinds of issues to see the bigger picture, right? To see the bigger picture and to keep moving forward. And it's difficult because when you live in a culture that for the last 50 years has been so individualistic, so hyper-competitive, so punitive, and so aggressive to so many people, our first initial reactions is to be aggressive, to be defensive, because that's what happens when you live in a world of scarcity, right? So part of our waking up, part of the development of our critical thinking is to learn to push back against that and to have the kind of inner strength, critical thinking skills, communicative skills that are going to allow us to do that. So that's fundamental. And for me, that's kind of part of the bigger leadership piece of how to do this. And that's why that's so important. And so a lot of times what I find in progressive groups and supporters of the Bernie movement or the left in general is how, cannibalizing we can be. Because there's so much frustration in trying to fight a system that is so powerful and so aggressive that there's burnout, there's anger, people want to be sectarian sometimes, people's entire identity gets tied to whether you support this group or that group or whatnot. And so a lot of the work that I'm involved with and the people that I have the pleasure of, my colleagues and some of the people I have the pleasure of working with, including real progressives and others, is about doing that. It's about learning to understand one another and getting to that next level and seeing how most of the time we're not even in opposition, right? I mean, I think, for example, having a sober Marxist understanding of the world is fundamental. That's not in opposition to what modern monetary theory is saying. It's not. Being a feminist is not in opposition to this. Understanding the importance of racial justice and racism in this country is not in opposition to any of this. And certainly seeing the importance of environmental justice and the catastrophe that's coming our way is not in opposition to any of this, right? And so we need to start learning to seeing how to bring that together in a vision. And with MMT, and for maybe some of the listeners who have been following my page who are not as familiar with MMT, understanding that we live in a country that the government is the issuer of the currency and holds the monopoly on the U.S. dollar does not mean that we need then to collect funds to finance our federal spending. At the federal level, right, we all know this, all the MMTers know this, we don't need to collect taxes, we don't need to finance federal spending. We spend first and then collect taxes. And we're stuck in this debate. And I see it all the time with progressives, like people on the Young Turks. Cenk was debating what's his name, Ben Shapiro one time, and they got caught up in this conversation about raising taxes on the wealthy to pay for things. When that doesn't, and we always lose because we enter into this moralistic debate of how much on who and this and that, and people don't want to pay more tax, right? And it's like there are certain elites who I do believe in raising their taxes because it's a political question. It's a question of controlling how much power you have on society, and that's important. When you're a multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire, we don't want you to buy elections. We don't want you to just, use all this robust wealth, a lot of which is coming from exploitation and rent on things on work and value that's actually being produced by other people, right? When you have so much power, we do want to tax high because that's a way of controlling all that excess power. But when it comes to what else we can do in our fiscal tools, we need to break that paradigm. It's fundamental to be able to break that paradigm so that we can achieve things like universal health care, tuition-free public education, and then the big one, I think, which is next on the agenda in terms of how we've been talking about it in that order, is the federal jobs guarantee, which is fundamental to operationalizing a lot of the social movements and the needs of communities, the environment, society that are so important to us, right? And seeing that the limits to that is not how are we going to pay for it. The limits to that is, can the economy take it? Will it cause inflation given the real resources available? And right now, something that I think we all need to understand is that we're underutilizing our people and our resources. They're being underutilized. And the costs, the downside of this, the downside of unemployment, the downside of underemployment is far more catastrophic and far more dangerous for this society, far more pathological, I would say, than whether prices are going to rise a little bit or whether they're going to have a little bit of inflation. But we're so controlled by this very financialized view, and that's kind of one of the things that you learn in philosophy, the way that our culture has been co-opted by the institutions that hold power today, which today are the financiers. That we think in terms of our society through their lens, and that's something that we need to break through. And so, this is knowledge that we need to spread to the rest of our society, that when it comes to federal spending and that tool that we can use, it's not about how are you going to pay for it, because we are the ones that control. We're a sovereign currency issuer. It's about, can our economy take it?
So let's talk about this for a second. There was an article, and I wish I would have had a screen cap of it. There was an article that spoke about how they are paying prisoners now to do full-time work because the labor market is tightening up. So you want to talk about how to find a way to get people jobs when they are considered throwaway human beings, which is disgusting. But this is the society that Calvinism and neoliberalism has created. Winners and losers, makers and takers, all this ridiculous Ayn Rand logic. This right here is proof positive that as labor markets tighten up, everyone can find work. And if we sit there and create a federal job guarantee to strip away the power of the capitalists, then all of a sudden they have to meet or beat that rate and that benefit package in order to get labor to work for them. This lifts all ships. And more importantly, it takes those individuals trapped in really, really bad situations, whether it be domestic abuse for women or whether it be situations where they're in Flint, Michigan, and their community leaders are not serving their needs. And they're trapped with poison water and no reasonable means of living. They can in turn pick up, go somewhere else that is serving their needs. And when that place decides it wants to take care of its people, it will take care of its people, but people will no longer be trapped in that environment. This is maximizing freedom, maximizing the ability for all ships to rise. I think that's a very key component to everything that we're doing here at Real Progressives, and what I believe the progressive movement should be targeting, instead of how to watch the financial collapse of the dollar and how to worry about the Rothschilds and how to worry about all this other gibberish that is prevalent, unfortunately, in certain subsects of our movement. Can you talk a little bit about what it would mean to minorities and possibly even the look of xenophobia when you have a job guarantee that removes some of the things that people use against one another, toward the bottom of the labor pool?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned conspiracy theories, because I've spent a long portion of my career just fascinated by their role in actually impeding progress. Because it's much easier to believe in a conspiracy theory that you have some wild, whether it's the space aliens, the reptilians, or the very anti-Semitic narrative of the Rothschilds or whatnot. You have someone to put your anger and your hatred at, but there's no real way to do anything about it, and you don't see the actual system at play that's creating all of this damage. But yeah, so the mere fact that we have a society that tells us that there are some throwaway people, is horrible. It's awful. And everybody on the right talks about how they want a small government, but that's such nonsense, because they have a huge government in the form of a very aggressive, carceral, and punitive state that does awful things to people. And so when we think about the idea of a federal jobs guarantee, I think what's really powerful about that is that we start to open up space for a transformation of what it means to work and what's the purpose of work. You know, I'm a guy who for a while was in favor of the universal basic income until I really started to look into the federal jobs guarantee. And it just so happened that the director of my program, so I'm a PhD student here in New York City at the New School. So the director of my program, Derek Hamilton, who I believe will be on your show later on, he is one of the biggest proponents of the federal jobs guarantee. So this kind of gave me like an inside look and an inside conversation of what this thing is all about. And what I started to see is that everything that I liked about the universal basic income could actually potentially be operationalized by the federal jobs guarantee. And the things that I don't like about it, we don't have that threat. So when you start to finance the possibility that anybody that wants work and is capable of working can get a job, and then you implement that, and I think this is where the tricky part is going to be, but this is where also the majority of the potential is. That encourages us on a local level to start to mobilize our capacity to give each other work and to care for one another. Because I think what's really important about this is where are we moving the idea of work from and to? And a lot of proponents of the jobs guarantee are talking about work that is about producing care, taking care of one another, rebuilding our communities, rebuilding our environment, creating value in community. For artists, this is very important because this is about creating cultural, intellectual, and social value that is different from just, well, let's just chase dollar signs and profit and try to get as rich as we can. That model is very predatory, as we all know. And there, you know, there's definitely a role and a place in society for some profit seeking and whatnot. But what we don't have right now is any kind of production for the sake of environmental value, community value, social value, artistic value. These things are being so commodified and so stripped of their substance that we're all in a panic, I feel. And in my experience and in my opinion, this is one of the reasons we're overworked, we're underpaid, and we're so alienated that mental health is really deteriorating for all of us, right? We're in a crisis right now.
Absolutely. So, Andres, I have a son who has sensory issues. He is unable to speak. He is unable to eat foods that are not puree. He's unable to, basically function the way most of us just take for granted. He's unable to make eye contact for long periods of time. These are things, though, that could be, solved, but they could be really fixed, if you will, through therapy. Great therapy. There's a lot of wonderful things out there. The problem is it costs money.
Right.
Just like mental health costs money. It
Right.
requires new resources. It requires more therapists. It requires more people that are trained to handle each of these things. We could have tons and tons of daycare centers out there that specifically meet with the needs of sensory disabled kids. And not just that, but you think about this, we are watching gun violence throughout America, these mass shootings, and we're seeing all these other things that, we always go for the quick win. Here's a quick, cheap opportunity to talk about guns, when the reality is that normal people, the system, the structure, the world, the punitive nature of capitalism and neoliberalism on top of it, all these conditions condensing down on people, it is far exceeding our natural order of being able to deal with stress as a rational, healthy human being. And you look at this and you work 40, 50 hours a week. You come home, you try and take care of your child who should have had 8 to 10 hours worth of help from somebody who is really trained to deal with that. But they just don't have it out there. It's just not available. They give you once a week, somebody come out for maybe an hour. People say that we don't have enough work out there. The robots are coming. I'm here to tell you, not only is that a lie, but that is literally the type of thing that's going to hurt my child. See, I personalize this stuff so people see that it's not some academic exercise here. We're talking about real lives, real people, real situations. And so as we put this stuff out there and you look, I mean, there was a video of a woman who was taken into a hospital. Obviously, she had no means of paying. And she was running around basically like out of it. The orderlies had taken her out of the hospital, set her at a bus stop, walked back in the hospital and let her there. That, my friend, is a direct result of austerity, of the neoliberal mindset of if you don't have the money, then you can't have the service, etc.
Right.
Talk from your perspective, having, give me your perspective on this.
I mean, this is where it gets real, right? And like you said, these aren't just academic exercises. This is our lives. And it's very personal for all of us. I know as somebody that has struggled with things like anxiety and other kind of, my own history, my own traumas and whatnot, it doesn't help when there is no institutional infrastructure for us to improve ourselves, right? I have a great friend who is a speech therapist, speech pathologist for kids. And, it's really incredible to see how much joy she gets when she's able to work with children who may be on the spectrum or who may have trouble speaking and communicating and making progress and seeing these children develop their abilities and be able to be more at peace and their families to be more at peace and whatnot. And this is back home in Texas where I was raised and grew up. And you see the Texas legislation, Congress, the Texas legislature cut funding for children to receive these services because, budget cuts and we don't want to pay for that. And that's awful. That is just the epitome of a pathological society. And, for some people, it doesn't matter to them because their worldview and their paradigm is in a different place. But I think that's where the battle's at. What do we really want our society to look like?
That's right. And so when you hit something so hard on the head that I want to stop you there, and I don't want to lose it. The idea of what our society should look like. So one of our mottos, one of our taglines in our own internal literature that drives what we do is that Real Progressives is the true north of the progressive movement. And the reason why we picked that was because we didn't want to care what any party said. We didn't want to care what any leaders said. We wanted to just go with what was right, period. Not what was feasible at this point in time, not with what, would be okay with some people hearing, but the real true north of what it means to be able to achieve a truly great future that we all benefit from, And that's one of the things that has got me extremely excited about having you join this team is because you take us to a new level. The things you're saying right now are incredible. These are the kinds of things that fill out those other knowledge areas, not just the economic justice where we talk about the same stuff that we all understand, but many of those folks out there don't have a clue about. But these other things, these other areas are things that people that don't understand economics, they have a tie into those areas. And as we penetrate them and we describe this world, all of a sudden they realize the one shackle, the one thing that's really blocking this, aside from rigged systems and all these other things we tell ourselves, is the fact that we as a nation don't have enough political power and pressure to put on the powers that be to make them serve these needs because we don't understand the fundamental question of how are you going to pay for it. And when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton went at war, this is why when people say we would have been better off if Hillary would have won, I think are a little naive because Hillary would have put everybody back to sleep. Those people would have allowed all the same neoliberal crap that's been going on for the last 40 plus years. It would have gone on unabated and they would have been telling us to calm down, that we're misogynistic or that we're whatever, we're Bernie bros, whatever it is. And they would have continued down this path of neoliberalism unabated. Now we have a situation where the devil is so stark, so unapologetic, that we have no choice but to unite and rise up. We have no choice but to see these intersectional traits and stop quibbling about identity politics and start looking at intersectional politics, where we blend all the different views and all the different aspects of our lives, of our individuality, and come up with a collective push so that we can win for the whole team. I mean, to me, this is so vital, and we're so divided and balkanized. You bring an added element here that allows us to pull those other pieces together in a way that I think is exceptional. I just want to say that out loud for our team.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think, listening to what you were saying, my fear, had a Clinton presidency taken place, or any kind of establishment Democrat politician, is that the next time, like the conditions, the contradictory, the boiling up that's happening in our society, the things that produce Donald Trump, the things that are producing these neo-Nazis that are and these alt-righters that are marching and whatnot, it just would have gotten worse. And my fear is that the next time, it wouldn't have been a Trump, but it would have been someone more like a Steve Bannon. And it is just going to get worse and worse and worse unless we actually address the thing that is stripping away the social fabric of our lives. And that's something that's a perspective that I use a lot. It's based on this guy named Karl Polanyi, another one of the big Karls, who understood, and he wrote about how this drive to turn everything into a global market society that's purely based on profit is stripping away our social fabric. Because if you think about the way that the mainstream economists talk and argue and debate and do their research, it's all about this thing called the economy that is natural and is separate from the rest of our lives. And so in trying to do policy and to do politics, and that's neoliberalism, right? And to separate all these things intellectually and in practice from the reality of our social ties, our social relations, the thing that makes us human, that is destroying us. That is destroying all of us, including people who are wealthy and well off. I think that's an important thing as well, because obviously the violence happens in a different way, but everybody's worse off from this. That might sound a little controversial, but I truly believe that to find the real inner force that's going to let us live to our fullest potential, whether you are middle class, upper middle class, wealthy, or you're receiving some of the brute violence in the working class or in the working poor and you're underemployed, we're all kind of suffering from all of this. And so I think, reimagining, like we had mentioned before, reimagining how and what our society could look like is fundamental, and it's key. So, like identity politics, that's something that you were mentioning. It kind of, the whole idea of identity politics is a way that intersectionality has been co-opted by establishment politicians and academics. The whole idea to begin with was that certain social groups that were experiencing either discrimination or a disadvantage in society were all overlapping and interdependent with one another and existed within the context of a system. So in our capitalist society, it relies on oftentimes gender and women to do the social labor that goes unpaid, that is able to prop up and support the, oftentimes working men who go into the workforce and then get exploited and get underpaid by their bigger employees and whatnot. And at the same time, there is a hierarchy based on race. This country's wealth was built in large part on slavery. We know that historically speaking. There's a component of international racism and imperialism that comes to play into this. And so it's not so much about our identities, like I identify with this or I identify that. Or as an immigrant now in this country, you fear the wrath of xenophobia, of people that see you as a second-class citizen because you don't perform and you don't identify with or embody the mainstream. You don't embody the dominant culture here that is represented symbolically by so many things. It's not just about your identity, right? Our identities are tied in the context of a system, and they're overlapping with one another. So you could be, and I will say, I do not support Hillary Clinton's politics at all, but she obviously did receive some misogyny. She did. Some of the most right-wing brutal attacks on her were very misogynistic. Of course, that doesn't mean I agree with her politics. That doesn't mean I think she's the future of this country. But the point was that even though she did receive those misogynistic attacks and sexism, being someone so close, having come as a board member of Walmart, being so tied to Wall Street, and also being a white woman who in that sense, in that part of the intersectionality, has a bunch of privileges, there was a very close proximity to power. And this is something that Cornel West likes to talk about a lot as well. We can even as if you're a minority, a person of color or whatnot, or from different communities, you can still have very close proximities to power. And that's what's important, right? And how we use, if we do have some privilege, I have some privilege as a man, as somebody that's, somewhat well off and been raised in a middle-class environment and whatnot, I have some privileges as well. It's not about feeling guilty. That's another misleading thing that says that if you have privilege in the society, they're just trying to make you feel guilty. It's not about feeling guilty. It's about understanding your place in the context of society, that you may not be receiving some of the discriminatory aspects that other people are. It's about trying to understand the lives of other people, of working people, of underemployed people, of unemployed people, of women, of African Americans, of the Latino community, of immigrants, trying to understand their experiences and seeing how you could be an ally, you can support, and then seeing how that makes sense within the context of your own life. And that's how together we're going to start to support one another's struggles and see that in the big picture, it's about creating the society that's beneficial for all. In the sense that some experiences are unique, some communities have unique experiences, and it's about respecting that, right? We can respect that. A working class person, we can respect that. A person of another color from another country, a woman's experience, we can respect that. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't lose any power. I lose no. I can, in my mind, I can perceive that I might lose some power if I don't support or if I support women's rights. But that doesn't have to be that way. That's the lie. That's the myth, right? Having empathy. And so actually, I try to flip that around. I feel more empowered when I come into solidarity with other people's needs and visions and aspirations. And I think that's something we all should do. And so to kind of tie this all back to MMT and real progressives, a big core foundation of whether we're able to do any of this is what happens on a material level. What are the things that reproduce our world? It's work. It's the ability to work. It's our existence in the workplace. And what are those conditions like? And who's getting the benefits from all this work and these resources that we're producing, this value that we're doing? So that's why the economic piece is a core pillar to all of this. And it needs to be central to our analysis, even though there's all these things that are around it as well.
So you bring up some good points, and I want to bring up another point from the underprivileged, down in the gutter white community that is literally the largest takers of welfare in the country,
right,
that has been diminished severely because of a loss of opportunity and a loss of careers, and the old blue collar work that they did in their communities left for cheaper tax rates and lower labor costs, etc., leaving them in destitution as well. And they look around and they see people receiving handouts, and they look around and they see other people seemingly getting benefits to move up in the ladder. And they hate, it makes them rage, it makes them feel sick inside. And so much comes from this neoliberal culture, and they accidentally support it without even understanding it. They end up propping up the very thing that brings about their own demise. Yeah. And so and you brought it up earlier, as a former Republican, as someone who speaks fluent conservative and understands the struggle that some of them feel, And especially now that I have a far more progressive view of the world, and I'm able to see their plight as well through a different lens, I realize that what we see a lot today, because of this balkanized Republicans versus Democrats, that's all, right? That's your world. That's the game plan. That's the fight. So naturally, if these guys support the people that are taking our jobs, if they support the people that are doing this, that, and the other, then naturally we've got to be Republicans. And they end up guns, God, you name it. And this culture is just as toxic to themselves as it is to anyone else. It's a self-perpetuating poverty for them as well. And it's very painful to see conservatives, because it's like you watch the situation for those lower class individuals, those folks that traditional blue collar work, and the jobs are gone. They don't have an education to fall back on. And so their plight is very real, and it's a direct result of neoliberalism. So when you talk MMT, when you talk job guarantee, when you talk about these benefits that we're talking about, it directly alters their lives. It directly helps them too. And in my mind, once the suffering ends there as well, you're going to see dramatic shifts in xenophobia concerns. You're going to see dramatic shifts in racism. Not all of it. There's still people that just genuinely have their issues. But I believe a lot of this is brought on systemically by neoliberalism on purpose to keep people divided, to keep them begging for crumbs and fighting amongst each other. You never hear them complaining about the wealthy taking their jobs and sending them overseas. You see them pointing at the people that took them here, that are getting looking over the shoulder to see what they're buying with their food stamps, or they're fighting over pennies, when the reality is the massive sucking of GDP done by these wealthy plutocrats and oligarchs. That's where it starts and dies, right there, man. And one of the other things that you brought up that I thought was very, very important is, as people are going through this struggle themselves, they're starting to wake up on their own. Everybody's at a different place in this process. We cannot be Democrat versus Republican to have the kind of changes that we want to see. We've got to really start speaking about truths, which is what MMT does. MMT eradicates, in my opinion, the whole right-left discussion. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, so the national debt's a bunch of bunk. The worry about the deficit's a bunch of bunk. Really what we have is a situation of, what do we want to see our national treasures go towards to empower and making our nation truly great, maybe for the first time ever? I mean, that's to me what I see. I see an opportunity to blow away all the dividing lines and really, really create a force for the 99% to take their country back, quite frankly, and around the world. This is not just a U.S. thing.
Right. And a lot of people would say that is what the left and progressivism is all about. It's something that kind of irks me is when people equate the ideological differences between left and right with Republicans versus Democrats. That's very misleading. If you want to call it the left, or if you want to call it something else, that's fine. If you want to call it democratic socialism or any kind of egalitarian idea, the very idea of trying to create an equal society on different grounds is what we're all about. This is kind of what we're all doing, and it's not just national; it's international. That's kind of the end goal, right? I think that neoliberals and conservatives are so successful because they have a strategy that looks at different periods of time. They have short-term goals and they have long-term goals. And the left doesn't really do that as well. We need to develop what we want in the short term and then what we want in the long term and kind of work through that. But yeah, to the point on, it's all part of our waking up, and it's a very challenging thing, but I can be totally passionately against white supremacy and yet support unequivocally the dignity and the rights of everybody in this country, including because it's not about being angry or hating white people or whiteness. It's about not supporting or being against hierarchies of supremacy. That's the idea, right? It's very different. So right now, there's kind of this thing that's in vogue of like, if you call out racism, you're the racist, right? That's like a thing that's becoming popular right now. But it's has nothing to do with that. It's about finding dignity in yourself first and foremost, right? I don't see myself or my community as something that's a deficit to this country or something that's inherently wrong or that I need to fix with my education or anything like that. The value that is in the human beings that are part of my community is just there. The fact that there is a system that disproportionately can aggravate certain communities more than others, or disproportionately brutalizes or does different things to different communities, that's something else. But the value is in us, right? The potential to mobilize and make things happen is in us. It's in our human dignity. It's in our rights as citizens. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right that if we were to mobilize and coordinate a movement using the insights of something like MMT, the framework of something like MMT, as well as other things, to really put together a robust economic development plan, that creates a tremendous opportunity to overcome a lot of the problems of xenophobia and racism. Absolutely, because in a world of scarcity, in a world where you're seeing your standard of living decline, sometimes for the first time in generations, a lot of people who received the benefits of the New Deal in some of these Midwestern places or in the rest of the Rust Belt of the country, when it's a lot of people of color were not receiving, were excluded from some of the benefits of the New Deal, they're now losing their standard of living for the first time in generations. They're the rate at which the year at which people pass away and die now is actually going down for the first time in decades. And so that's causing a big panic that's leading to a lot of these addictions, substance abuse addictions, depression, suicide, whatnot. And, when you are in a state of crisis, it's much more difficult to think, systemically and historically and whatnot. And the first thing that you do, the first thing that perhaps you've been told to do, is to find some other culture or people to blame. So yeah, if we do address this will absolutely create an opportunity. Now, the thing that will happen there is going to be, are people going to now choose to see others as deserving of their dignity, deserving of their rights, deserving of their own self-determination and agency? That's all privileged classes and categories, including myself in some, right? Or are we going to double down on the cultural and social capital that we get from our identities? And that's something that Derek Hamilton talks about in stratification economics. People vote against their own interest often. That's a big question, right? Because they actually get benefits from their identity, even if they're being screwed from somewhere else. If you invest, if you double down on who you are, you can still find a way to get something back from that, at least not in the way that somebody else is. So there's a lot of things happening on multiple ends, and that's why we need to attack this whole problem systemically from multiple sides, from multiple angles.
So I want to talk about something else. I mean, we're up against the hour, but I'm just feeling a vibe. Unless you need to go, I'm going to keep rolling with this. One of the things that is really important is the concept of trade, right? Yeah. We've seen the TPP, we've seen NAFTA, CAFTA, and all these other potential trade deals. And you watch Brexit, and you watch all these other globalization strategies where the wealthy get wealthy and the poor get poor. And one of the things that MMT informs us is that, net exporting is a real cost to the nation, whereas net importing is a real asset to the nation, where you're getting goods and services, in exchange for pieces of paper, et cetera, IOUs, so to speak. So in the case of the United States, in terms of quote unquote exporting jobs, all around the world, we're at different levels of maturity in terms of our civilization, if you will. And in the United States, we went crazy building out our infrastructure years ago. There was a tremendous rise during FDR. There was a lot of movement that was done in this country throughout different periods of time where we had some vision. However, over the last 40 plus years, we've allowed these things to dilapidate, and we've never included maintenance in them. It's extremely scarce. And you look at states, take, for example, my own state of Pennsylvania, where there's a $600 million deficit shortfall this year operating for the federal or for the state government. And you start asking yourself, well, where does money come from, right? And you look at the different choices that state governments have to make about fixing a bridge that's in D shape versus A shape or B shape, and you know, these grades and stuff like that. You think to yourself, if we had a real legitimate law about maintenance on all public works and services, from schools to levees to dams to whatever other public infrastructure we have, maybe the energy grid, you name it. If we built in a natural maintenance schedule that was part of a law, there would be so many jobs just maintaining the core bones of our country. It would be unbelievable. Many of these blue collar folks that are begging to twist the ties, you know, on a Tootsie Pop or a Hershey's Kiss, instead of fighting to get that job back, they could instead be underwater welders, or they could instead be working in, you know, building up our nation once again, really, really handling the infrastructure, and the constant maintenance of that will bring about a revival of work, blue collar, good blue collar work, you know, coupled with some white collar work as well. Sure. It's a win-win-win across the board. Instead of begging for the work you knew yesterday, start thinking about the work of tomorrow. And I'm not just talking about the care work with the job guarantee. I'm talking about real, honest to God, good jobs maintaining our nation. Think about it. If we go ahead and we provide free college for all, there's going to be a huge need for teachers. There's going to be a huge need for either college classrooms or virtual training centers or whatever. There's going to be a huge need for medical services, medical professionals, gurney makers, X-ray machine makers, X-ray techs, you name it. All these different jobs will suddenly be, wow, we don't have enough people. Now, all of a sudden, there's going to be a scarcity of workers to meet the demand for all this new work that we've been letting go to hell in a handbasket because of neoliberalism's austerity measures that takes away the public purpose, that eradicates our ability at the federal level to spend money on the needs of the people. But if we, as MMTers, wake up those friends in the progressive movement, not just in the progressive movement, but all over, if we can wake them up to the realization that taxes, A, don't fund spending, taxes do drive currency, and that we have all the money we will ever need at congressional appropriation if we have the political will and the resources to back it up, like you said in the beginning of this broadcast. One of the most vital things ever is to stop thinking about working for the man as the only way that we can do work, and start thinking about how we can serve our public purpose and how we can enhance and make our country better. You know, we don't have high-speed rail. Japan does, China does. You know, these people that they always joke around about, oh, communist China. Well, they're sitting there riding on IP version 6, state-of-the-art internet connections, state-of-the-art trains, state-of-the-art everything. I mean, they've got the most incredible. I don't know if you've ever seen some of these bike garages that they have, but they sit there and throw them in this little slot and it takes it down. It's amazing, some of the technology they have out there, but they're investing in their public infrastructure. We still are not. So how can we say there's no work to be done? We've got tons of work, and it's leaving our people sitting there with master's degrees serving you a latte at Starbucks.
Right.
It's just unfathomable to me that people within the real left, not the Democrat versus Republican, but many of the so-called socialists in this country are still trapped in a Eugene V. Debs world, that are not realizing that a modern money economy not only doesn't have capital flight, but it also has a whole slew of new opportunities if we but harness our power as people and push our executives and our elected representatives to do for us in this way. What are your thoughts about not worrying about the exports so much as worrying about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, healthcare, and education.
Well, Bill Nye, the science guy, he was interviewed by Bernie not too long ago, and one of the things that really stuck to me, the first thing he said was that we already have the technical and scientific expertise to go 100% renewable energy and the engineering expertise to just go ahead and build 100% renewable energy infrastructure in this country if we wanted to, if we had the political will. And so we're underutilizing our scientists, our engineers to do all of these things that would make our society so much better, because nobody can make a huge profit out of it. That's why we're not doing it. And what's funny about that is that the original corporation, the birth and the origin of the corporation was actually a public purpose institution they were given a charter by the US government to go do some public good. And it's been over, the years that the corporation itself got liberated and turned into a vehicle for the capitalist class. So, again, a lot of ideas kind of paint the left or paint democratic socialists or progressives as being anti-money or anti-wealth, when that's absurd, right? Like Bernie got knocked for having a $700 jacket or something like that. I mean, there's a huge difference between liking nice things, enjoying your life, having some dignity, looking good, whatever, at a reasonable level, and oligarchs who, like, literally you're moving hundreds of millions and billions of dollars and controlling all of it. That is a completely different thing. And they're making that amount of wealth and surplus value off of the work of all of us or off of the rents that we pay them. So I think it's really important to make that difference. This isn't about being against wealth or being against nice things. This is about a society that's dictated and run and governed based on what a small group of multi-million and billionaires want. Everything that affects our lives and that we do and that we need to do happens only if they want it to happen. And that's bullshit, right? We got to go back to public purpose. Like Joe Firestone says, like you say, that's this crazy idea that maybe we should do things because it's going to benefit our whole society. Maybe we all benefit from that. Maybe that's going to make us all better off. And that's why some of these Scandinavian countries are so much more advanced than we are, because they understand that and they invest in public purpose, and they do these things. They make these things happen.
So there was an article the other day in I don't know, it was Truth Out or Truth Dig. A couple of the bigger dogs in the Democratic Socialists of America went ahead and put out a great article, one for the ages, that I have bookmarked because it was so sweet to see DSA step out and do this. And you may even know the people that did it, man.
Yes, those are my good friends.
So,
those are my good friends.
Beautiful article. How are you going to pay for it? And for me, like, I'm dorky. I admit it right up front. But I sat there and I went from beaming with pride, joyful. I shared it everywhere 1,000 times over again. But then I went to sobbing because it was like, at last, finally, someone within that movement is cracking the code, making them see. And for all those people that have been working diligently within DSA, I know Modern Money Network, those guys have been out there like crazy, and there's a host of others that are working like crazy in there as well. But to see DSA starting to get it gave me more hope than you will ever have any. It was just an amazing feeling, because these are people that I most closely align with. And as I look, their economics was so horrid, in my opinion, that I couldn't do it. But to see that happening really made me feel fully just empowered. Like, yes, the tide is turning. We are starting to have enough momentum to start being unapologetically MMT and just straight up, this is the way we make this happen. Because there is a real lives on the line for us not to get this.
Of course.
This is not a benign vote. This is not, you see it this way, I see it that way, opinions. No, this is reality. That's what I love about MMT. It strips away all the politics. Every ounce of politics is gone. And you just look at macroeconomic truth and you say, how do I make this work for our nation? within our Constitution, our government is supposed to spend on the general welfare. How does it do that? How does it achieve its goal of making sure that we all have the equality and the opportunity? And MMT is the answer, the bedrock to that, because MMT provides the tokens that provide access to the resources. And when we spend at the bottom, we all get an opportunity to partake in the benefits of society. So yeah. DSA, that was a beautiful thing, man.
It was. And, like I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I got into MMT because some people that I really respected got me into it. And two of those individuals were the authors of that article, Alex Kolokotronis and Sean, I believe. What was I going to say? Yeah, no, honestly, I think that MMT is only the beginning. For me, it's never been, I kind of just knew from the beginning, okay, this thing makes sense. Like, we need to stop. This is true. This obviously makes sense. Some of the most interesting, unique, and brilliant up-and-coming economists are supporting this post-Keynesian neo-Chartalist view, right? It didn't come out of nowhere, right? There's a great background of intellectual rigor behind it. Someone like Warren Mosler, who's actually in the system, right? Warren Mosler knew, because he was there firsthand, how this stuff works. And these ideas coming together, for me, it just kind of made it obvious. I'm done with having these debates that go nowhere about how we're going to pay for it, when that's not even how our macroeconomy and our monetary system works at all. Personally, I'm not interested in fighting with other people. I've been through that. I've gone through that. Like I said, the left is very cannibalizing. It can be very sectarian. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in useless debates. I'm interested in productive debates that ask important key questions that you can offer a counter, or you can learn from, go back, check, think about things again, improve your own theory, right? Whether it's MMT or anything else, we always have to be iterative. We always have to be ready to adapt, to improve the idea, to go in, look at some of the details, get it better. And that's what's happening with it as well. Those are some of my thoughts on that. I kind of like when people just want to be confrontational for the sake of it. Sometimes on Facebook I get caught up in those debates, but I usually kind of just let it go. We have a movement to lead, right? Like,
that's right.
People will come around to these things when we give them something to come around to and block out the noise, right? Like I mentioned, we have this unique and very fundamental perspective and framework on the modern economy, on modern money. We have these other values in terms of justice, environmental justice, social. We care about health and well-being. We have a vision for a different kind of society. We want a jobs guarantee. We want everybody to have a dignified work. And that doesn't mean like a crappy job where like you're overworked. No, that's why I'm saying we're changing the nature of work.
Yes.
A job that gives you dignity, that is a reasonable amount of hours, right? We're going to lower the hours that people have to work, because it's kind of ridiculous right now. A job that pays them actually a living wage. And so all of these things are going to be fundamental. They're all part of our arsenal. And that's what we're doing. And we're moving forward with it, right? We're moving forward with it. We're strategizing. We're making relationships. Let's build relationships. Let's try to understand where the other people are coming from. Show them where we're coming from. Make those links. That's the only way we're going to do it. Because, if we fight, if we bring each other down, that's exactly what the powers that be want. That's what we've had. That's what our society, as it is right now, fosters and cultivates. We're living in this. The other day I was shopping at like a CVS, and it just hit me like, we're living in a dystopia. Like, it was real. I felt it at a visceral level. And so we got a lot to lose, but we also got a lot to gain. And so I'm optimistic about it. Let's keep moving forward.
So we use this as our finishing off point here.
Yeah.
First things first, let me thank you again for not only doing this broadcast with me, but also joining up with us and partnering with me in particular. Your help in working through the business side of this and understanding how to lay these cornerstones together so that we're making the touch points with the millennials, and we're making the touch points with the academics, and we're making the touch points within various segments of society is just unbelievably important to me. I mean, this is just an incredibly wonderful opportunity, in my opinion, to make this thing explode. The most important thing, though, that I want to stress before we close off is that as we talk about what is the realm of possibility, I live in a modest, in some ways it would be considered a really nice house, but it's modest house in the grand scheme of things. But when I look at houses in Monte Carlo, and I look at houses, along Pacific Coast Highway, looking over the Pacific, and the whole Rodeo Drive world, and so forth. In my mind, I cannot envision living in one of those. I can't even envision a path by which I would live in one of those. Not that I want to. I'm just saying I can't even envision that. I can't envision going to a Maybach dealer just for the grin of it and getting a Maybach fully loaded, whatever I want, and walking away and then getting a 5-star meal somewhere. I can't envision being able to get whatever clothes I want to get whenever I want to get them. Part of the reason is because I've never, ever experienced the kind of wealth it would take to be able to live that kind of a mindset, have that kind of lifestyle, etc. The American public has never experienced real prosperity as a whole either. So it's got a deficit of imagination as it tries to see the possibilities, because the pain and the suffering neoliberalism has brought on them by both of the popular parties has really devastated the ability to think beyond just immediate, oh my God, I've got to eat. Oh my God, I got to stay warm. Oh my goodness, how am I feeding my kids? Oh my God, how am I getting home in time to do homework with my kid? Or just how can I lay down in the bed and go to sleep at night without worrying about if I'm getting foreclosed on? I mean, this is the real world that we live in. However, it is an unnecessarily scarce world that has given us all a totally bastardized view of the world, and we've learned to walk with a limp instead of fixing the broken leg. Can you talk to me a little bit about the imagination deficit and some of the things that it brings about as a result of not being able to see a better tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it all comes down to. I mean, it's the lack of an imagination as to what's possible as human beings. This all comes down to the future of humanity. It's what is the legacy of the people that walk this planet going to be? And we've gotten so used to living in such a world of scarcity, where we feel that unless we become as powerful as possible, then our life is going to suck. That's had a consequence on our subjectivity and our consciousness itself. Our very consciousness is oftentimes dictated and controlled by the dominant ideologies and the dominant powers of the world. But there is always the opportunity to resist, both socially and politically, and also as an individual. One of the things I love the most about existentialism in my years studying philosophy, and the amazing time I had with wonderful professors studying philosophy was that idea from existentialism that no matter what's happening to you, your response can be yours, at least in your mind and in your heart, right? We can reject injustice, the way the world looks. We can reject the ideology that we're pressured into accepting and conforming to. We can reject the social narratives that run our lives and the people around us, right? We can reject them, and like Plato said, we can leave the cave, and we can come back and get other people to leave the cave as well and find the sunlight. And then that's what this is all about, right? Because at the end of the day, we're the ones that are going to dream about that future where 100 years from now, these future generations, our children, our children's children, are going to live a much more peaceful, harmonious life, and look back and see some of us, remember some of us, and be like, man, that was a tough time, but they stuck there. They hung in there, and they stuck with it, and that's how we were able to get to where we are now. And people have done it in the past, even when things looked a lot more grim than they may have now.
So tying into all this real quickly, Joe Firestone has been leading a one-man crusade for something called overt congressional funding, which basically is taking MMT, making it ridiculously transparent by making the powers that be add language to every bill that basically says, you've got to make the Fed put the money in the Treasury, period, and it will get rid of the debt because they'll know they won't have to borrow the money, right? And so he's put out a series of articles. He's put out a series of letters. He's really strove to put together a plan for getting these certified letters to Congress and so forth to enable us to be able to think. Now, I will tell you, it plays on the fears of the debt because a lot of people just can't grasp the idea that a country creates its own money is not in freaking debt like you know it. But because of that, he's created this workaround that's MMT compliant that allows us to get in front of Congress critters and demand that they serve our needs. So it's something to look forward to in the future. As an organization, we'll help push this. And as individuals, be on the lookout, because as we build out our activism pillar, as we build out our media pillar, and we provide you with quality programming that actually has a purpose and that isn't just a bunch of fluff. Mind you, fluff sells a lot better than real meaty broadcasts. I believe what we provided you tonight was a lot of meat. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the fluff. Sorry, I don't know that I'm going to ever find the fluff, because the fluff is not what is going to change our world. It may be easy consumption, but it's not what's going to change our world. And bringing someone like Andrés to the team is proof positive of our commitment to substance, to intersectionality, and to creating a much bigger tent than we ever envisioned. And Andrés, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining up with us. Please, I'll let you go ahead and close us out.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's been a great honor to be here. It's been wonderful. I've also been reading all of these comments, and they've been great as well. I'm very happy to be part of this community. And I think this is the beginning. We want people to have some knowledge on some of these things, on MMT, on to break some of these discourses that say very misleading things about the debt and misleading things about how we collectively are going to be able to stimulate public purpose spending and re-envision work itself. And so it starts here with people like us, you and me, and those viewing, to go out there, continue to educate ourselves, have the discipline to continue to educate ourselves, and produce this kind of media and grow it little by little, day by day, block by block. Understand one another's communities better, build and enhance and expand our empathy and our sympathy and our desire to understand one another better, challenge one another when it's important, both call someone out when we have to, but also call them in to understand when that's necessary, and just continue the good fight, because that's all we can do, right? And we got to maintain some optimism of the will, but also some optimism of the mind. And I think that's what we're doing here together. So thank you, Steve.
Oh, man, you got it. All right. So without further ado, thank you all for spending about an hour and a half with us tonight. I hope it was worth your time. Hopefully we get some good clips out of this and we'll get it sent out. Please share widely. Our ability to reach the people is directly contingent upon your helping us spread that word. So we thank each and every one of you. If you'd like to volunteer for Real Progressives, please go to our page. We have a sign up there. You can click on it. You can submit and volunteer for us. And please, we'll put the links up for this. If you guys would like to support us financially, we have monthly contributions through our Patreon account, which no amounts too small, no amounts too large. We definitely need your support to do the things we want to do. We need financial contributions. And for those of you who only want to be able to maybe donate one time only, we do, in fact, have a PayPal account that you can donate to that as well. So without further ado, Andrés, thank you so much for joining the team. Thank you for joining me tonight. And we look forward to more broadcasts with you in the near future.
Thank you. And thank you to all the viewers. You all are great.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.